The majority of J.S. Bach's concertos were written during the years 1717 through 1723, while the composer was employed by the court of Anhalt-Köthen, a Calvinist court whose expectations were quite different from those imposed on him later at Leipzig, about which more later. Elaborate church music was not expected at Anhalt-Köthen. Indeed, it was not tolerated there. So Bach was free to turn his talents elsewhere, and the result is monumental. He was in charge of a small, very talented group of instrumentalists, and his concertos are a good measure of their abilities. Those concertos include the 6 so-called Brandenburg concertos, which I covered earlier in this series. When he took the Leipzig appointment, however, Bach found himself in very different circumstances. There he was in charge of music for 3 churches, and that included the composing of their service music, leaving him little time for the instrumental music that had occupied his energies earlier. But he owned a house full of harpsichords and plenty of stringed instruments, so it was during that time that he arranged many of his concertos for 1 or more harpsichords in place of the originally intended solo instruments. In those cases, the harpsichordist's right hand was generally assigned the original solo part intact, and a left-hand accompaniment was added. So it is that a tight connection can be seen between such harpsichord works and their original models. In some cases, the original concertos exist alongside the harpsichord versions. In other cases, the original has been lost and has been reconstructed using extant models as a guide. That is the case with the concerto under review here. There's no serious debate among Bach scholars that the concerto for 2 harpsichords, BWV 1060, was originally written for violin, oboe, and strings, as you'll hear it in this video. Some of the details are in contention. In fact, you may notice some differences even during the opening ritornello between what you see in the score and what you hear in this performance. But the identification of the original instruments couldn't be easier. The solo parts fit the oboe and violin perfectly, both as to range and in other respects. Witness the fact that the fast figurations in the solo violin part are missing from the oboe part, where they would be unidiomatic to the point of impracticality, if not impossibility. This concerto has long struck me as one of Bach's very best, possibly owing to my long acquaintance with it as an oboist. I think I've performed it maybe 4 times. But more likely because it's simply excellent in every way I can think of. The craftsmanship throughout is extraordinary, as is its aesthetic sweep. It is one of the most satisfying listening experiences I can name, certainly the equal of any of the Brandenburgs, and I hope to show you why this is so. The outer movements, as usual, hew to the ritornello ideal, with both movements opening and closing with identical, highly chiseled tutti passages. In the case of movement 1, those ritornelli frame a long central section in which fragments of the ritornello punctuate the solo work, but are treated in a sufficiently soloistic manner as to set them apart from the frame. The lines between soli and tutti are, in other words, artfully blurred in this movement. In the final movement, the alternation is a little more routine, but the ritornello interjections are quite short, never more than a couple of 4-measure phrases. And speaking of 4-measure phrases, the structure of the final movement is almost obsessively devoted to that ideal, as I hope my running commentary, itself rather obsessive, will make clear. The central movement is, as usual, the real gem of the concerto, its heart and soul. It is set in the relative major key of the whole and organized in 4 monumentally broad paragraphs, plus a half-cadential link to movement 3. The overall form of the movement is A-A-B-A, and I have identified the constituent paragraphs in that way in my analysis. The first two A paragraphs actually take the form of a slow-moving fugue for four voices, but this procedure is somewhat disguised by the very breadth of the unfolding. Paragraph 2 is essentially a sequence of paragraph 1, the same length and arriving at a congruent outcome despite some significant and very affecting differences. In both cases, a closing passage of extraordinary tenderness brings the two solo voices together in a warm embrace, their lines intertwining like those of climbing vines on a trellis. The third A paragraph is a reduction of the first one. In the A paragraphs, the orchestral strings play their accompaniment pizzicato. In contrasting paragraph B, the upper strings sustain their sound with long bows. The contrast is wonderful. The recording is by the Budapest Strings, led by violinist Bela Banfalvi and featuring oboist Emilia Csanky. This beautiful performance is available on the Naxos label.
Thank you.